The front door clicked shut with a sound that seemed heavier than usual. David dropped his laptop bag by the entrance and let out a long breath that he felt like he'd been holding all day. His shoulders ached from tension, and there was a dull throbbing behind his eyes that had started around lunch and only gotten worse. It had been one of those days at work where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The presentation he'd worked on for weeks had technical difficulties right from the start. The projector wouldn't connect to his laptop, and when it finally did, half his slides were missing. His boss had that disappointed look on his face the entire time, and David could practically see his promotion chances slipping away with each awkward pause. Then there was the traffic on the way home. What should have been a 20-minute drive turned into an hour of stop-and-go frustration. All he wanted now was to collapse on the couch, maybe order some pizza, and watch something mindless on television until his brain stopped racing. The apartment smelled incredible, though. Something rich and savory was cooking in the kitchen, and he could hear soft music playing in the background. Candles flickered on the dining table, casting warm shadows on the walls. Lisa had clearly been busy while he was gone. She appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, wearing that bright smile that usually made his day better. Her hair was done nicely, and she was wearing the dress he complimented her on last month. There was an excitement in her eyes that made him feel a little guilty about his own mood. "Hey baby, perfect timing," she said, walking over to give him a hug. "Dinner's almost ready. I made that chicken dish you love, the one with the herbs from the farmer's market." David hugged her back, trying to muster some enthusiasm. He really did appreciate what she'd done. It was thoughtful and sweet, and normally he would have been thrilled. But right now, even the smell of food was making his headache worse. "That smells amazing," he said. And he meant it. Even if his voice came out flatter than intended, you didn't have to go to all this trouble. Lisa pulled back to look at him, her smile faltering slightly as she noticed the tiredness in his face. But instead of asking what was wrong, she seemed to interpret it as a challenge to cheer him up. "Oh, it wasn't any trouble at all," she said, taking his hand and trying to lead him toward the dining room. "I picked up some of that wine you liked from last weekend too. Come on. Sitting down and eating will make you feel so much better." David gently pulled his hand back, not wanting to seem ungrateful, but feeling overwhelmed by the energy she was putting out. His head was pounding now, and the candlelight that was meant to be romantic was actually making his eyes hurt. "Actually, honey, I'm really wiped out tonight," he said carefully. "Would it be okay if we just ordered something simple and maybe watched a movie instead? I'm not really feeling up to a big dinner right now." He watched as confusion crossed Lisa's face. She clearly put a lot of effort into this evening, and he could see her trying to process his request. But instead of understanding that he needed something low-key, she seemed to take it as a sign that she needed to try harder. "Come on, you'll feel better once you sit down and relax," she said, her voice taking on that encouraging tone she used when she was trying to motivate him. "I already opened the wine, and everything's ready. You know how good you feel after a nice dinner together." David rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure building behind his eyes. He loved Lisa's caring nature, but sometimes she had trouble accepting when he said no to something. She always seemed to think she could fix whatever was bothering him. With the right combination of food, attention, and persistence, Lisa, "I really just need to decompress tonight," he tried again. "My head is killing me, and work was awful. I just want to be quiet for a while." But she was already moving around the kitchen, pulling plates from the cabinet, and talking about how the meal would help him forget about his bad day. She planned this evening, probably looked forward to it all day, and he could see she wasn't ready to let go of that vision. The thing was, David knew Lisa meant well. She'd always been someone who showed love through taking care of people. When she was stressed or upset, she liked to be pampered and fussed over, and she naturally assumed everyone else was the same way. In her mind, refusing a nice dinner she'd prepared was like refusing to feel better, which didn't make sense to her. As she continued setting the table and chattering about her day, David felt a familiar sense of being trapped. He'd said what he needed clearly, hadn't he? but somehow his words seemed to bounce right off her, like she was hearing something completely different than what he was saying. He sat down heavily on the couch, hoping that maybe if he just stayed there, she'd get the message that he really wasn't up for an elaborate evening. But within minutes, Lisa was beside him with a glass of wine and that determined look in her eyes that meant she wasn't giving up anytime soon. "Here, this will help with your headache," she said, settling next to him closer than he really wanted. "Right now, and then we can eat. And I'll tell you about this funny thing that happened at work today." David took the wine glass but didn't drink from it. He was starting to realize that this evening was going to be more complicated than he'd hoped. Lisa had made plans, and she was going to see them through whether he was on board or not. The question was how to handle this without hurting her feelings or making the situation worse. What he really needed was space and quiet, but what Lisa was offering was attention and togetherness. Neither of them was wrong, exactly, but they were definitely not on the same page. And as Lisa snuggled closer and started talking about dinner, David had the sinking feeling that this misunderstanding was just getting started. David sat on the couch, still holding the untouched wine glass, hoping Lisa would pick up on his signals. But instead of giving him space, she seemed to be gearing up for what he was starting to recognize as one of her caring campaigns. She had that look in her eyes that said she'd figured out the solution to his problems, whether he wanted it or not. "You know what," Lisa said, standing up with sudden energy. "You're just stressed. Remember last month when you had that deadline? I made you that special tea and gave you a back rub, and you felt so much better afterward." David watched as she disappeared into the kitchen, already planning her next move. He could hear her opening cabinets and running water. When someone was determined to help Lisa, there was no stopping her. It was actually one of the things he'd found charming about her when they first started dating. She was the kind of person who brought soup when you were sick and remembered your favorite coffee order. But right now, that caring nature felt more like a steamroller than a comfort. She returned with a steaming mug that smelled like chamomile and honey. "Here, drink this first. It'll help with your headache, and then you'll have an appetite for dinner." "Lisa, honestly, I just need to sit quietly for a bit," David tried again, accepting the mug but setting it on the coffee table. "I'm not really in the mood for tea or dinner right now." But she was already moving behind the couch, her hands settling on his shoulders. "You're so tense," she said, beginning to massage the knots in his neck. "No wonder you feel awful. Just let me work these out, and you'll see how much better you feel." The massage actually did feel good physically, but emotionally it was making David feel more trapped. Every time he tried to communicate what he needed, Lisa seemed to hear it as a symptom to be treated rather than a request to be respected. In her mind, if she could just find the right combination of remedies, she could fix his mood and salvage the evening she'd planned. "Really, I appreciate this, but what I need most is just some quiet time," David said, gently moving away from her hands. "Maybe we could just sit here together without talking for a while." Lisa paused, her hands still hovering near his shoulders. For a moment, he thought maybe she'd finally heard him. But then she brightened up again, as if she'd just had another brilliant idea. "Oh, I know what would help," she said, walking over to the stereo. "Remember that playlist you made last year? The one with all those mellow songs? That'll help you relax." Soon the apartment was filled with soft acoustic guitar, music that David normally enjoyed, but that right now felt like another layer of stimulation his overwhelmed brain didn't want to process. Lisa settled back beside him, closer than before, her leg pressed against his. "This is nice, isn't it?" she said, taking his hand. "See, you're already looking more relaxed." David wasn't looking more relaxed. If anything, he was feeling more agitated with each passing minute. It was like being in a car where someone else was driving and refusing to stop. Even though you kept asking to get out, Lisa meant well, but she was creating the exact opposite of what he'd asked for. "The thing is," he said, trying a different approach, "when I'm this tired, sometimes company actually makes me feel more drained. It's not personal. It's just how my brain works when I'm overwhelmed." Lisa turned to face him fully, and he could see her trying to process this information. For a few seconds, he felt hopeful that maybe she was finally understanding. But then she shook her head with a sad smile. "You don't mean that," she said gently. "You're just stressed and not thinking clearly. When was the last time you actually relaxed? You've been working so hard lately. You probably don't even remember what it feels like to unwind." There it was again. His actual words being dismissed as symptoms of stress rather than genuine communication. David felt a familiar frustration rising in his chest. This wasn't the first time Lisa had decided she knew what he needed better than he did. She got up again, this time heading toward the dining room. "Come on, let's at least try a few bites of dinner. You haven't eaten since lunch, right?" "Low blood sugar makes everything feel worse, Lisa, please," David said. But she was already in the kitchen, and he could hear her moving plates around. When she came back, she was carrying a plate loaded with the chicken dish she'd prepared. It looked delicious and smelled even better. But David's stomach was in knots from stress, and his head was still pounding. The last thing he wanted was to sit at a candlelit table making conversation. "Just a little bit," Lisa said, setting the plate on the coffee table in front of him. "You'll feel so much better with some food in your stomach. And then maybe we can take a hot shower together. That always helps you relax." David stared at the plate, feeling like he was caught in some kind of loop where nothing he said actually registered. Lisa had decided that his "not tonight" was really a cry for help, and she was determined to provide that help whether he wanted it or not. "I keep telling you what I need," he said, his voice getting a little sharper despite his efforts to stay calm. "Why won't you listen to me?" Lisa looked hurt and confused. "I am listening. You said you had a bad day and you're tired, so I'm trying to help you feel better. That's what people do for each other." And there was the heart of the misunderstanding. In Lisa's world, caring for someone meant actively doing things to improve their situation. The idea of helping by doing nothing, by simply respecting someone's request to be left alone, didn't compute for her. She was showing love the only way she knew how, but it was the exact opposite of what David needed. He could see this was going to be a long evening, and he was starting to wonder if there was any way to make Lisa understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to give them exactly what they're asking for, even if it doesn't make sense to you. An hour had passed, and David felt like he was trapped in a caring prison. Lisa had tried everything she could think of to improve his mood, and with each failed attempt, she seemed to become more determined rather than less. It was like watching someone try to force a square peg into a round hole, convinced that if they just pushed hard enough, it would eventually fit. The untouched dinner plate still sat on the coffee table, along with the cold tea and the wine glass he'd never sipped from. Lisa had dimmed the lights even more, thinking it would help his headache. But the flickering candles were actually making it worse. The soft music continued playing, and she'd even brought him a heating pad for his shoulders, which was now draped over the back of the couch like a flag of surrender. "Maybe you're coming down with something," Lisa said, settling beside him for what felt like the 10th time that evening. She reached over to feel his forehead with the back of her hand. "You don't feel warm." But sometimes these things start slowly. David gently moved her hand away. "I'm not sick, Lisa. I'm just tired and overwhelmed. It happens sometimes. I just need some space to decompress." But even as he said it, he could see that familiar look crossing her face again. The one that said she was already formulating her next plan of attack. Lisa was the kind of person who believed every problem had a solution, and she wasn't the type to give up easily. "You know what?" she said, standing up with renewed energy. "I think you need a complete reset. Why don't we run a hot bath? I've got those bath salts you got me for my birthday. The lavender ones that are supposed to be super relaxing." "Lisa." "No," David said, his voice getting firmer. "I don't want a bath. I don't want dinner. I don't want tea or music or massage. I just want to sit here quietly by myself for a while." She paused in the doorway, and for a moment David thought maybe his more direct approach had finally gotten through to her. But then she turned back with that patient smile that was starting to drive him crazy. "Baby, "You're being a little dramatic," she said gently. "You say you want to be alone, but that's just the stress talking. When people are really overwhelmed, they don't always know what's best for them. That's why they need people who care about them to help figure it out." David felt something snap inside his chest. Here was his girlfriend, someone who was supposed to know him better than almost anyone, telling him that he didn't understand his own needs. It was like being told he was wrong about being hungry or needing to use the bathroom. "I'm not being dramatic," he said, his voice getting louder despite his efforts to stay calm. "I'm telling you exactly what I need, and you keep ignoring me. This isn't helping. It's making everything worse." Lisa's face crumpled a little, and David immediately felt guilty for raising his voice. But instead of backing down, she seemed to interpret his frustration as proof that she was on the right track. "See? You're getting all worked up," she said, moving closer again. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're so stressed that you can't even accept help when it's offered. But that's okay. I'm not giving up on you." She disappeared into the bathroom, and David could hear water running. She was actually drawing him a bath despite everything he'd just said. He put his head in his hands, feeling completely defeated. How had this evening gone so far off the rails? When Lisa came back, she had that triumphant look on her face that meant she'd solved the puzzle. "Okay, it's ready, and I found those muscle-relaxing bath bombs too. This is going to be perfect." "Lisa, I said no to the bath," David said, not lifting his head from his hands. "Oh, come on," she said, tugging at his arm. "You haven't even tried it yet. How do you know it won't help if you don't give it a chance?" David stood up abruptly, pulling his arm away more forcefully than he'd intended. "Because I know myself. Because I know what I need right now. And it's not a bath or dinner or any of the other things you keep trying to force on me." Lisa stepped back, looking hurt and confused. "Force? I'm not forcing anything. I'm trying to take care of you. That's what people do when they love each other. But I keep telling you how to take care of me," David said, his frustration finally boiling over. "I keep telling you exactly what would help, and you keep deciding that I'm wrong." For the first time all evening, Lisa seemed genuinely taken aback. She stood there for a moment, blinking at him like she was seeing him from a completely different angle. "But what you're asking for doesn't make sense," she said slowly. "You're upset, and you want me to just leave you alone? That's not how you help someone you care about." And there it was, the fundamental difference between them that had been driving this entire evening. Lisa's way of showing love was active and involved. When she was upset, she wanted attention, comfort, and someone to fuss over her. The idea that someone might need the opposite was genuinely foreign to her. "Maybe not for you," David said, trying to soften his voice again. "But that's how I work. When I'm overwhelmed, I need quiet and space to process things. Being around people, even people I love, feels like too much stimulation." Lisa stared at him like he'd just told her he was from another planet. "But that's so lonely. How does being alone help anything?" David realized they were finally having the conversation they should have had 2 hours ago. But he wasn't sure it was going to lead anywhere productive. Lisa wasn't being malicious or selfish. She genuinely couldn't understand how solitude could be comforting rather than isolating. "It helps me reset," he tried to explain. "It's like when you're overstimulated. Every interaction feels like noise, even good ones. I need silence to hear myself think again." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, and David could practically see her trying to wrap her mind around this concept. But then she shook her head with that same patient smile. "I think you just need to trust me on this one," she said. "I know it feels scary to let someone take care of you, but that's what I'm here for." David felt his heart sink, even after everything he just explained. Lisa was still convinced that she knew better than he did about what he needed. This wasn't going to end well. David walked toward the bedroom, hoping that maybe a closed door would finally send the message that Lisa seemed unable to hear. His head was pounding worse than before, and the tension in his shoulders had spread down his entire back. All he wanted was 10 minutes of silence to reset his overwhelmed nervous system. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands, trying to breathe deeply and let some of the stress drain away. For a brief moment, he thought maybe Lisa would respect this final retreat and give him the space he'd been asking for. All evening, but within minutes, he heard her footsteps in the hallway, followed by a gentle knock on the bedroom door. "Hey." Lisa's voice came through the wood, soft and concerned. "I brought you some water and those headache pills you like. Can I come in?" David closed his eyes. Even now, even after everything they just discussed, she was still trying to fix him, with remedies and care. He didn't answer, hoping she'd take the hint and leave him alone for a few minutes. Instead, the door opened anyway. "I know you said you wanted space," Lisa said, stepping into the room with a glass of water and a bottle of pills, "but I was thinking about what you said, and I think I figured out what the real problem is." David looked up at her, exhausted. "What's the real problem, Lisa?" She sat down next to him on the bed, setting the water on the nightstand. "You're burned out, like, really burned out, and when people are that exhausted, they sometimes think they want to be alone. But what they really need is for someone to take care of them so they don't have to think about anything." It was like listening to someone explain that black was actually white, and they were very confident about it. David stared at her, wondering how they'd gotten to this point where his own girlfriend was telling him that his understanding of his own mind was wrong. "Lisa," he said slowly, "I need you to hear what I'm saying. Not what you think I should be saying, or what would make sense to you, but what I'm actually telling you. I need to be alone right now. That's not burnout talking. That's not confusion or stress. That's me knowing myself and communicating what I need." But Lisa was already shaking her head with that patient, knowing smile that had started to feel condescending. "I understand that you think that's what you need," she said gently. "But sometimes when we're really overwhelmed, we don't make the best decisions for ourselves. That's why we have people who love us to help us see what we can't see." David felt something break inside him. Not just frustration anymore, but something deeper. A sense that his voice, his autonomy, his right to know his own mind was being completely dismissed by someone who claimed to love him. "So what you're saying," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is that you know better than I do about what's happening inside my own head." Lisa seemed to miss the warning tone in his voice. "I'm saying that love means not giving up on someone just because they're pushing you away. Sometimes caring for someone means doing what's best for them even when they can't see it themselves." She reached over and started rubbing his back, and David felt every muscle in his body tense up. Her touch, which was meant to be comforting, felt invasive and overwhelming. He moved away from her hand, but she just followed, continuing to rub circles on his shoulder. "Lisa, stop," he said firmly. "Don't touch me right now." She paused for just a second, then continued with the back rub. "You're so tense. This will help relax you." That was the moment David realized that Lisa wasn't going to stop. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She had decided that his no didn't really mean no, that his requests for space were just symptoms to be treated, and that her way of caring was the only valid way. "I said stop touching me," David said, standing up abruptly and moving away from the bed. "I said stop, and you kept going. Do you understand what that means?" For the first time all evening, Lisa looked truly startled. She'd been so focused on her mission to make him feel better that she hadn't noticed how her persistence was affecting him. "I was just trying to help your sore muscles," she said defensively. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. You were doing something I specifically asked you not to do," David said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've been asking you to stop all evening. I've been asking for space, for quiet, for you to listen to what I'm telling you, and every single time, you've decided that you know better than I do." Lisa stood up too, her face flushing. "That's not fair. Everything I've done tonight has been to take care of you. I made dinner. I tried to help you relax. I offered you a bath. I've been nothing but caring and supportive." "You've been caring in the way that makes sense to you," David said, "but you haven't been listening. There's a difference between giving someone what you think they need and giving them what they're actually asking for." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and David felt the familiar guilt start to creep in. He hated seeing her cry, hated being the cause of her pain. But he also knew that if he backed down now, nothing would change. "I don't understand," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "How's trying to take care of someone I love a bad thing? How is wanting to help you feel better wrong?" David sat back down on the bed, suddenly feeling exhausted in a whole new way. It's not wrong to want to help, but it's wrong to ignore what someone is telling you they need. It's wrong to decide that your way of caring is the only right way. Lisa wiped her eyes, looking confused and hurt. "But your way doesn't make sense. How does being alone help anything? How does refusing comfort and care make someone feel better?" "It doesn't have to make sense to you," David said quietly. "It just has to make sense to me. And you have to trust that I know myself well enough to understand what I need." They stared at each other across the room, both of them realizing that this conversation had become about something much bigger than just one difficult evening. This was about respect, about boundaries, about the right to be heard and believe when you communicate your needs. Lisa sat down in the chair by the window, looking small and confused. "I thought I was being a good girlfriend," she said softly. "You?" "We're trying to be," David said. "But good intentions don't automatically make something helpful. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to give them exactly what they ask for, even if it doesn't make sense to you." The room fell silent except for the sound of Lisa crying quietly. David wanted to comfort her, but he also knew that this moment was important. For the first time all evening, she was finally hearing him, and he couldn't let that slip away just because it was uncomfortable. The next morning arrived with an awkward silence that felt heavier than the tension from the night before. David woke up on the couch where he'd eventually fallen asleep, and Lisa was already in the kitchen making coffee. They moved around each other carefully, like two people trying not to bump into furniture in the dark. Lisa had obviously been thinking about their conversation all night. Her eyes were a little red, and she had that distant look she got when she was processing something difficult. David felt the familiar urge to apologize and smooth things over, but he also knew that backing down now would just reset them to where they started. "I saved you some coffee," Lisa said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. "It's on the counter." "Thanks," David replied, accepting the peace offering for what it was. They stood there for a moment, both of them unsure how to begin the conversation they knew they needed to have. Finally, Lisa took a deep breath and sat down at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she began slowly, "and I need to ask you something, even though I'm not sure I want to hear the answer." David sat down across from her, wrapping his hands around the warm coffee mug. "Okay. Do I do this a lot?" she asked, her voice small. "Do I ignore what you're telling me and just push ahead with what I think is best?" The question hung in the air between them. David could see how much it cost her to ask it, and he felt a surge of love for her willingness to look at herself honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. "Sometimes," he said gently, "not about everything, but when you think someone needs taking care of, yeah, you kind of take over." Lisa's face crumpled a little. "I thought I was being loving. When my family was upset, my mom would always swoop in and fix everything, make special meals, run baths, do all these caring things until we felt better. I thought that's what love looked like." David reached across the table and took her hand. "That is what love looks like for some people, but not for everyone. And the hard part is figuring out what each person actually needs instead of assuming they need what you would need." "But how was I supposed to know?" Lisa asked, tears starting to form in her eyes again. "You never told me before that you needed space when you were upset." "I tried to tell you last night," David said carefully, "multiple times. But every time I said what I needed, you seemed to hear it as a problem to solve instead of information to respect." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her coffee. "I kept thinking that if I could just find the right thing, I could make you feel better. Like it was a puzzle and I was missing the right piece. But I wasn't a puzzle to solve." David said, "I was a person telling you what I needed, and when you decided my needs didn't make sense, You stopped listening to me and started trying to fix me instead. The words stung. David could see that. But Lisa didn't get defensive this time. Instead, she seemed to be really hearing him for the first time. I made you feel like your voice didn't matter, she said slowly, the realization dawning on her face. I was so sure I knew what was best that I didn't even consider that. You might actually know yourself better than I do. David squeezed her hand. I know you meant well. I know you were trying to show love the only way you knew how. But impact matters more than intention. Even good intentions can hurt someone if they're not what that person needs, Lisa nodded, wiping her eyes with her free hand. I kept telling myself I was being a good girlfriend. But really I was being controlling, wasn't I? I was more interested in feeling helpful than in actually helping. It was hard to watch someone you love realize painful truths about themselves. But David could see that this moment was important for both of them. Lisa was finally understanding something that had been a problem in their relationship for months. So, what do we do now? Lisa asked. How do I learn to listen to what you're actually saying instead of what I think you should be saying? David had been thinking about this all night too. Maybe we start by talking about how we each handle stress and what we each need when we're overwhelmed. Like, really talking about it, not just assuming we know. Lisa took a shaky breath. Okay? You first. Tell me how your brain works when you're stressed. David thought for a moment about how to explain it. When I'm overwhelmed, it's like my emotional circuits are overloaded. Any input, even good input, feels like too much. I need quiet and space to let everything settle back down. It's not about you or a relationship. It's just how I reset. Lisa nodded slowly. And when I try to comfort you during those times, it feels like more overload instead of relief. Exactly. It's like if someone had a headache and you tried to help by playing loud music. Your heart is in the right place, but you're adding to the problem instead of solving it. That makes sense, Lisa said, though David could see her struggling with the concept. It's so different from how I work. When I'm upset, I want connection and comfort and someone to fuss over me. Being alone when I'm stressed feels like punishment, and that's okay, David said. That's how you work, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem comes when we assume everyone works the same way we do. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both processing this new understanding. Finally, Lisa spoke up again. I owe you an apology, she said. A real one. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you last night. I'm sorry I kept pushing when you asked me to stop. I'm sorry I made you feel like your own needs didn't matter. David felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight since the night before. Thank you. That means a lot. I want to do better, Lisa continued. But I'm going to need help. This whole love means giving people what they ask for, instead of what I think they need thing is going to take practice. David smiled for the first time since he'd walked through the door the previous evening. We can practice together, and I promise I'll be clear about what I need from the beginning, instead of hoping you'll figure it out from hints. Deal, Lisa said, managing a small smile of her own. So what happens the next time you have a bad day and need space? Next time, I'll say clearly that I need alone time to decompress. And you'll trust that I know what I'm talking about, even if it doesn't make sense to you. Lisa nodded. And if I start slipping back into fix-it mode, you'll call me out on it right away instead of letting it build up. Agreed, David said. This is going to be weird for both of us at first. You're going to have to fight the urge to help in the way that feels natural to you. And I'm going to have to be more direct about my needs even when it feels awkward. Relationships are harder than they look in movies, Lisa said with a rueful laugh. Much harder. David agreed, but also worth figuring out. As they finished their coffee and started planning their day, both of them felt like they'd learned something important. Love wasn't just about caring for someone. It was about caring for them in the way they needed to be cared for, even when that way was completely different from what felt natural to you. It would take time and practice, but they'd finally started having the right conversation, and that felt like the beginning of something better.